Please
Okay,
ask as many questions as you want.
great. Thank you.
And can I double check, Anna, are you recording?
Yes, I just started the recording.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Cool. So thank you guys for hopping on tonight. I'm just going to talk about our adoption program that we have here in Phoenix. We actually do have two locations. We have the Phoenix location and the Tucson location. But the Sonoran Desert Museum runs the Tucson location for us. So I'm going to kind of go over why we have so many in captivity, what the issue is there, why can't we release them, and then kind of how you can adopt and also how you can volunteer. We did just start a volunteer program, so you can actually help with the tortoises via transport or with husbandry. Of course, it's in Phoenix, so that's probably a long commute for you guys, but it's out there. So we'll go ahead and get started. This is the slideshow that I use for Zoom meetings. So we usually meet everybody, but you can write your questions in the Q&A box, or we can just wait until after the presentation and we will go over the questions there as well. So our program was started way back in 2015. Since then, we've probably taken in probably about 2,000 tortoises, and we found them new homes. We usually get about 250 a year. Last year, we got close to 400. So we had 300 and I want to say 320 going into the season, which is very abnormal. So it's just growing. The issues are getting worse. It's not going away. So they are starting to think of a lot of different things to kind of modify that and laws to help with that. So some of the tortoises that we have do require medical attention. So we do get donations from the public, and we are funded by the Heritage funding program and by the SWIG program, so by tortoise funding. So we don't get any tax dollars or anything like that. So why do we have so many? Breeding is illegal. I put the rule at the bottom for anybody that's interested. They are going to start to rewrite that rule because there are a lot of little loopholes in there, and it can be a little confusing. So they're rewriting that as of now. Of course, that's going to take a while. So they can have, we'll kind of go over it some more. They can have up to 12 babies a year. And in captivity, of course, they all survive. In the wild, 1% survives. That's why we're not overflowing with tortoises in the wild, but we are in captivity. We also get a lot of tortoises when people move out of state because they are native wildlife. You cannot take them across state lines. There's different subspecies of desert tortoise in different states. So like Nevada, California, Florida, Texas, they all have a different type of desert tortoise. And federal does not want them commingling and breeding. So you cannot take them across state lines. You also cannot bring other tortoises from other states into, or countries, there's some in Mexico, into Arizona. A lot of them get out. We do get a lot of inappropriate housing. We don't have everybody who has a desert tortoise in our database because this has gone back to like the 80s and people have taken them out of the wild and kept them. And of course they live to be 80 years old, so they still have them. So we don't have everybody written down. So we do get some that escape and they're obviously a pet, like, you know, their shell's pyramided or they're eating romaine lettuce. They're very friendly. They're in a very, very urban environment in the middle of a neighborhood. People just don't solidify their gates. They don't realize how they can squeeze through things. They get out quite a bit, especially now during monsoons. They're moving around a lot. We do get a lot that have illnesses that people can't care for. So upper respiratory disease, which we'll talk about a little bit more. Super, super, super common in captive desert tortoises, but not so much in the wild population. So they all have a bacteria called mycoplasma in their lungs. And sometimes their immune system just isn't good enough to fight it. Usually that's due to captive husbandry. So it's super contagious. It causes bubbles coming out of the nose. It's basically, I don't know if anybody knows what kennel cough is in dogs, but it's the same thing. Very, very contagious, pretty easy to treat, never actually goes away, but you can treat it. So we do have a lot of chronic tortoises. that will flare up with respiratory symptoms a couple times a year. And we don't want to release these guys into the wild, even if they're not showing symptoms, because they can still have it and just not show any outward signs. So it's too risky to release them into the wild if we don't actually know if they have it or not. So like I said, they have 12 babies a year. They live to be 80. We did a calculation of how much one female can produce in her lifetime, and it's about 20,000 eggs. So she can have 12 eggs, they all hatch, they each have, say they're all female, they each have 12 eggs, they each have 12 eggs. So that ends up with 20,000 tortoises in captivity. So you can see how it gets out of control very fast. A lot of people just don't know their gender. They put them together, don't realize they will mate when they're put together. Doesn't matter. We're in their native environment, so they're going to mate. So, and all the eggs survive because they're in captivity. People find little babies popping out everywhere, and they do bury their eggs. They don't do any kind of parental care. They bury them and walk away. They only come together in the wild to breed, and then they separate. So we also don't like to have the two together because they will fight. So this is usually how you tell gender. The easiest or most accurate way would be with the underside of the shell there. So you can see the female is on the left and the male is on the right. So the male's got a big concave dip there and the female's completely flat. You can go with the tail, but it's not always 100%. The only way you'll know is with that concavity of the shell. So that's so that he can mount the female and not continue to slip off. So he needs that little dip. You usually cannot tell gender on these guys until they're maybe 8 years old. You can kind of start to see the dip at 8 years, but you won't know for sure until they're 10. That's usually when they start fighting, getting super territorial, bobbing their heads at each other, biting each other. Male, female, doesn't matter. And then they are sexually mature at 12 years old. So from 12 years old to 80, 90 years old, they can reproduce every year. We do get a lot of questions, and people, they submit photos of, hey, I found a tortoise. The desert tortoise, it's just because I've been working with them for 10 years that I can just say, oh, that's a desert tortoise. But they are very hard to tell the difference, especially when they're babies. So if they're sulcata tortoises and desert tortoises, the desert's on the far left, and they have a nuchal scoot. So they have this little extra square on their shell right above their head. Sulcatas don't have that, just comes to a V. So that's usually how you can tell the difference between a sulcata baby and a desert tortoise baby. We also get a lot of box turtles. We get a lot of red-eared sliders. We don't take them in, but we get a lot of people that submit, found photos. The pond sliders they're not native here either, but people do dump them in our lakes because they can't, they get them as itty bitty babies and don't realize that they grow to be decent size, and their tank husbandry is a lot. So they just dump them in a lake. We do have a couple native box turtles here, so we do get that a lot. Usually they have a little hinge in the front of their shell. You can tell the difference. They have red eyes and different amount of toes. I don't see them very often, but we do. It happens.
That's stuff I thought. You gotta have a lot of strength.
I can't hear what you said. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I muted them.
Oh.
You're good. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So we have a chart online that you can follow of who's who. So basically, you can follow from the pictures, but again, desert tortoises and sulcata tortoises are very, very close, very similar. Their care is very similar as well. Big difference is desert tortoises brumate. Sulcata tortoises do not brumate. So they are awake all winter. So that's the first thing I ask. Size as well. Sulcatas get 200-ish pounds, and desert tortoises only get to maybe 12. Biggest one I ever had was 20. So if somebody says, I found a 80-pound tortoise in my yard, I'll know, oh, it's not a desert tortoise. So you can follow this chart too to see the different types of tortoises. We see Russian tortoises a lot. You can keep them out in your yard, and they tend to escape a lot of people's yards too. So this chart is on our website. So what do we do when we receive a tortoise? We give them a little epoxy tag. So on the back of their shell, we put a little colored tag. Every single year is a different color, so that if somebody finds a tortoise, they say, oh, it's a red tag. I know, okay, that's from 2015. I can go back in the record and easily find it. Every tortoise has its own number linked with that color. So this one, for example, would be R024. So we'd look that number up in our database and say, oh, okay, this belongs to this person. And we can call them and get it back to them. So the tagging is really important because if they don't have a tag, we assume that it doesn't have an owner or the owner just didn't come forward to claim it, which has happened before. And it's a very, very, very unfortunate situation. They get adopted out and we cannot give them back. So get your tortoise tagged. I do it for free. Of course, you have to come to the Phoenix office. I have to ask the Desert Museum if they will do tagging there as well. I know that they're a little more busy because they kind of do it as a side for us. So you can get it tagged. Just give us your information. We'll put it in the database. It's not scannable. It's not a microchip. It just lets us know where this tortoise belongs or whose yard this tortoise belongs in. They can fall off. They can chip off after a couple of years and we can re-tag them, no problem. It's just a 2-part epoxy. As long as it does not go over the suture lines, it's totally fine, totally safe for the tortoise. Hardens up in about 5 minutes. And then they get weighed, they get a vet exam, they get checked for parasites. So we do a fecal on every single tortoise and make sure that they do not have protozoans, roundworm, hookworm, tapeworm. I've seen all of those. That way we don't contaminate our pens outside with potential parasites. And then every adult tortoise is kept solitary in its own enclosure. So we used to have 30 enclosures total, and then we ran out of space, so we had to split them. So we have 61 right now. So we have a guide to adoption. There's an adoption guide that's on our website, and it has pretty much everything you need to know about them. We're going to run through it a little bit here, but it goes over their diet, their husbandry. It kind of shows you how to build a burrow. It gives you a list of veterinarians in the area. So you can download that if you're still kind of not sure. Download that, read it over, see if it's something that you're willing to do or something that you can do. Learn about their care, learn about their diet. You'll need to build a burrow. We cannot approve your application until we see a burrow. We do need to know that it's there. I do not decline people very often. I only do that if you're not willing to work with us on something. So if somebody's got a pool in their yard and they're not willing to fence it off, or they have a fire pit and they're not willing to get rid of it, or they're not willing to keep their dog separated or watch their dog with the tortoise or something like that, then of course we can't approve that. We don't want the tortoise to go to a home that's going to be dangerous. So the only reason I would decline is if you're not willing to kind of help us out. So if you submit your application, get your burrow built, I know it's a lot of work, but the worst we're going to tell you is, hey, can you add more dirt to that burrow? If you're not willing to kind of like work with us on anything that's hazardous. So you want to make sure your yard is safe. We don't normally like rock yards. They get too hot. So we'll go over that a little bit more. The application does require some photos. So just give me pictures of wherever that tortoise is going to be. I want to see it just to make sure that it's safe and make sure that it can't get out of your yard, can't get out of the enclosure. You can let it roam your entire yard, or you can build it a separate enclosure. It's entirely up to you. If you want that tortoise to be in your yard, there's nowhere for it to get out. Or if you have a pool or something like that and you want to keep it separated, build it enclosure. So after you're approved, since I think a lot of you guys are probably closer to the Tucson location, I would send your information over to the Desert Museum and they schedule a time to pick up. You can always pick up here in Phoenix. We always have tortoises. We just need to set up a time, an appointment for you to do that. And I know it's a bit of a drive. You do get to pick your tortoise out. So you'll walk around all of our enclosures. Right now, during the heat of the summer, I always recommend coming early in the morning because they are all out and you have more to pick from rather than just looking at their butts in the burrows. So morning is always best if you want to really know about the tortoise during the summer. And then you just get to take them home. There is no money involved in this. There's no adoption fee. We do accept donations, like I mentioned earlier, but there is no actual fee to take one home. So say you're like, yeah, I want to do this. I want to adopt a tortoise. Make sure your yard is safe. Open fire pits. We have had tortoises wander right into them. So you can do one that's above ground. That's totally fine. But if it's in the ground and it's just open, they'll walk right into it. Pools, same thing. They'll walk right into it. They're dense. They will sink and they cannot swim. So it turns into a pretty intense respiratory infection, or at worst, it turns into pneumonia and they cannot get better. So you definitely want to keep your pool fenced off. Watch your dogs around the tortoise. We do get quite a few dog maulings with the tortoises. Their legs get chewed up. We have to do an amputation on a leg. It happens a lot. A lot of people will think, oh, my dog's going to be great with them, but it ends up not working out. So anytime you introduce a new animal to your home, you always want to watch how they interact with the other animals in your house. So if you have the dog go outside, see how they interact with the tortoise. If you get worried about it, we will take it back. No big deal. We'd rather be safe than sorry. They cannot go with other tortoises, any other species, because there are diseases in other species that are deadly to the desert tortoise and vice versa. So we don't want anything to happen to your current tortoise and this one. So we want to make sure that everybody's healthy, everybody's happy, and everybody's safe. They are also very aggressive. They will try to kill each other in the same enclosure. So we always have to keep them separate. Breeding is also illegal, so you cannot do a male and a female. Female, they will also fight. Male, they always fight too. It's very rare for us to get anything that is happy cohabiting with another desert tortoise or desert tortoise of its gender. So it's not a common thing. And it does sound a little funny when you think, oh, a tortoise is going to fight. Like, what do? They're a tortoise. So we'll kind of go over that a little bit more right here. So people always ask, can I have two? You can, if you can separate your yard and make sure that they're completely separated. I'm fine if you want to try them together if they're the same gender. Do not put a male and a female together. They will breed. And that's just awkward for you. And I don't want any babies. So we don't want any illegal breeding. You can try it. You can try a female and a female together. If they end up fighting, you do have to separate them. It's not like they do a hierarchy thing where they fight, they get over it, and then they're fine. They just will constantly pester each other, bite each other. The picture on the right is a tortoise that was bitten by another tortoise. They took a nice little chunk out of the neck there, and the owners didn't notice because, you know, they tuck in their shell and you wouldn't see it. By the time they realized, oh, my tortoise is really lethargic, not moving a whole lot, we found this huge, they brought it in, we found this huge necrotic wound that went all the way down to the bone. So it can be pretty intense. They will bite each other. They'll usually bite scales off of each other's legs, bite each other's faces. The biggest thing is they're going to try to flip each other. So the males and females have these gular scoots, which are those two hooked things right under their chin. And they use those to flip each other over. So I know a lot of people have seen that video of a sulcata flipping the other one over, and they're like, oh, he saved it. But he probably flipped them in the first place, because they'll flip them over, shove them into a corner, and keep them there until either the tortoise suffocates, because their lungs are right on the back of their shell there, like you can see in the left picture. Their lungs sit right on the back of the shell. So if they're on their back for way too long, it can compress their lungs and they can suffocate. Also during the heat of the summer, of course, because it's Arizona, they can bake in the sun. So it's pretty brutal. So you definitely want to watch them together. If they end up fighting, you see head bobbing, they got to be separated. And a solid wall too, because if they see each other, it's just going to be constant stress for both of them. And we don't want to do that. We also have a law of 1 per person per household. They do need to be over the age of 18. So say you have 2 adults in your house, you can do 2, but they got to be separated. Make sure you have 2 completely separate enclosures, and then you should be fine, or willing to separate. Make sure you have the space to separate, just in case. They usually do fine together until they're about 10 years old, and that's usually when they start to kind of go at each other. So these are different types of burrows that we have. We do have a video that you can look up on YouTube. It's just game and fish burrow building. It's myself and a coworker, and we're building burrows. So there's a cinder block burrow and a pipe burrow. The cinder block, each one took about 2 hours. The pipe one, you can use a large trash can. You can use the bottom of a dog crate, the bottom that doesn't have the holes in it. Anything that's sturdy plastic you can use, because you're going to bury that thing. You're going to dig down. Deepest part at the far end is going to be about 18 inches, and you're going to cover that with as much dirt as you can. The dirt's going to provide insulation to protect them during the summer and insulation during the winter so that they don't freeze, because they're going to spend their whole winter in there. So like I said, the worst thing that you're going to get is me saying, hey, can you add more dirt to your burrow, just to make sure that that tortoise is going to be safe in a good temperature burrow. The cinder block one is it's a little more expensive, but and you do have to buy more supplies. But I've seen these ones work a little bit better, because you can modify how much dirt's on top a little bit better, and the tortoise can't knock off all that dirt a little bit better than the pipe burrows. So it's a U-shaped cinder block, a bunch of wonder board on top. You just throw a bunch of dirt on top of that, make sure the cinder blocks are filled with dirt. And you can barely see the wonder board or the cinder blocks. So that's the goal, is you don't want to see any of that. So it kind of looks like it's just a hole in ground. We don't do under the shed. A lot of people send pictures of sheds and they say, well, they can brumate under that shed, but we don't know if that shed's stable, and a lot of times they're not. So we don't want anything collapsing on the tortoise. Now I see a lot of people put a dog igloo out. Those are insulated for a dog, but not well enough for a tortoise. They're also very large for a desert tortoise. So they just don't provide the proper insulation. But I mean, you can bury it, but it'd probably be really difficult, but you can bury it. The enclosure space, so we kind of changed this recently. Adults, of course, the bigger the better, but if you have an 18 by 18 space, awesome. If you have 10 by 10, that's fine. I just wouldn't recommend a large adult. These are some enclosures that we have out in the Kingman office. You can see the burrow right in the middle. Juveniles, you can do like an 8 by 8, and hatchlings, we have all three of these sizes. Hatchlings, you can do 4 by 4, but you want to have a mesh screen over top so that they can't get taken by any kind of predators like ravens or crows. They don't usually get taken by like bobcats or anything like that. I've only ever seen it with ravens and maybe a coyote. You want to make sure there's plenty of shade in there. Even though they're desert dwelling animals, they get hot, they can get overheated. Make sure that there's plenty of shade. You can give them little spots. You can make sure there's a little bit of sun in there during the day, or at certain times of the day. They always have access to sun and shade, but make sure that burrow is shaded during the hottest part of the day, because we don't want them to bake in there. Plant some plants. You can do native or non-native. They like a bunch of variety of plants. We have a little brochure that's on our website as well that gives you a bunch of native plants that you can go through. And then a lot of nurseries we're trying to work with, and they're going to stick a little tortoise on the plant that's friendly for them that they can eat. Some of them, some are toxic, of course, so eucalyptus, bougainvillea, anything like that. It is toxic. If it's toxic to humans and dogs or cats, it's going to be toxic to the tortoise. Rocks versus grass. So an all rock yard can be dangerous because it can cause dehydration. It heats up way too fast, and they just get overheated. They don't know where to go. There's nowhere for them to get out of that heat. Grass is always great. You don't have to have it. If you have just dirt, that's fine too. The grass is going to be their primary diet. So if you don't really want something that you have to constantly feed every single day, you can just grow some grass and they'll be your little lawnmower. Timothy hay and Bermuda hay are great supplements for grass if you don't have any of them. Artificial grass, we've had an issue with that in the past. It's plastic, it's green, it looks yummy to the tortoises, so some of them will eat it, and that's a nice hefty vet bill for you. So we don't want that to happen because they can make them pretty sick. So if you have artificial grass, just if you're willing to block it off, if they show interest, great. If you're not, then unfortunately we wouldn't be able to put a tortoise in your home. So we accept applications year round. We just don't adopt them out year round because they're sleeping. I don't want to pull one out of their burrow and make it go to a new place. We stop adoptions usually 3 weeks before they go down. I don't know when they're going to go down this year. I'll probably extend adoptions to November because it's still so warm. They're not even showing any sign of wanting to go down. So usually you'll start to see them slow down, stop eating so much, stay in their burrow more. So that's usually when we call it, but that's not happening right now. We usually do adoptions April to September. Generally, like I was saying, I might extend it to November. April is when they start. It's usually when they wake up. So during the winter, they're asleep, they're in their burrow, but they brumate. So they will come out when it's warm. Like say we have a day that's like 80, they'll come out of their burrow, lay in the sun. They always look like they're dead. They're not, but they always look like it. Scares me to death. And then they're just going to turn around, go right back in their burrow. They don't usually eat anything. They might get a drink, but they almost never eat anything. You don't want them to eat anything because you don't want all that food sitting in their gut while they're just sitting there in the burrow brumating. Oh. The previous slide was about oh my goodness. Let me go back. There we go. So we used to not be able to let people in to pick out their tortoise because of COVID, but now we can. So just let me know what you're looking for. I can kind of help you find them. Like I said, morning's always best if you really want to pick one. Packet of information, you get a little adoption guide, you get a certificate of adoption, and a couple other fun little things in your packet. The wildlife center that these guys are housed at is close to the public, so you can't just show up and look at the tortoises. You have to make an appointment, and you have to be let in. You can't get in without somebody being there. So this is kind of their diet, like I was saying, hay, native plants. You don't want to do too much produce. It's got too much certain types of minerals and vitamins in it that can make them very sick. You only want to do fruit as a treat. It's got way too much sugar in it. Their body can't process it very well, so you don't want to do too much fruit. Plants to avoid would be oleander, bougainvillea, citrus, eucalyptus. They don't normally eat citrus, but just to be on the safe side, I would say and watch them with it, because the wax on the leaves can make them a little ill. It takes a minute for the toxins in these plants to kind of metabolize in the tortoise. So you might see them eat it and say, oh, it's been a day, they're fine. Keep an eye on them for a bit. Water requirements. So this is a big question that I get a lot. They're desert animals. Shouldn't they get water every single day? No. They're desert animals, so they are adapted to not having water every single day. We only fill our water dishes on Tuesdays and Saturdays, so we let it run dry. So it'll be full Tuesday, Wednesday. Usually it's dry by Thursday. And let it stay dry. Usually in the wild, these guys will come out when it rains and they'll get a really big drink, and then they'll basically flush their system of any extra calcium or minerals or anything like that. In captivity, if they have constant access to water, they don't flush their systems like that. So all those minerals build up in their bladder and cause these stones. In the middle picture there, you can see an x-ray, and that big white circle in the middle of that tortoise is a bladder stone. So I see those a lot, very, very common. Unfortunately, this year we don't have the funding to be able to do surgery on them to remove them. So the ones with stones this big are typically my hospice tortoises. It's out for debate whether it makes them uncomfortable or not. They act fine, they eat, they drink, they move around, they poop. You wouldn't even know unless you felt it or took an x-ray. So I just let them do their thing, and once they get uncomfortable, the adopter can decide if they want to do that surgery or not. So those are more so for people who don't know if they'll be in the state for super long, for a couple years. You do want to make sure that their water dish, they're able to fit in so they can climb in safely, soak, and climb out safely. Veterinary care, we usually recommend 2 exams a year, pre-brumation, post-brumation. The adoption guide's got this list of vets in it. So you are also responsible for any veterinary cost. We can't help with any of that. Once you adopt that tortoise, you're responsible for that tortoise. I'm happy to answer questions, but I'm not a vet, so I just give you my best expert advice. So lots of illnesses we see are the respiratory, which is what we kind of talked about. So that one picture on the right, see that little snot bubble coming out of his nose? That's how you know they have a respiratory disease. Pneumonia, usually it can progress to that if they're bad enough. It's a lot of them are chronic. It can't be cured, can be treated, but it can't be cured. Usually it's with antibiotic injections. We see a lot of parasites, dehydration, injuries, malnutrition. So unfortunately, we do get quite a few that people housed indoors improperly in a tank. These tortoises do not do well inside in a tank or inside with a light. They need to be outside. Even at hatchling, they need to be outside. Keeping them indoors can stunt their immune system. And then for adults, it's kind of rude because they need to wander. They have a territory of about a mile. So you want to make sure that you've got, space for them to move around, and just kept inside in a tote or in a bathroom isn't enough for them. So you want to make sure that you've got the area for them. The picture on the left there is a tortoise with dehydration, the eyes super sunken in. We see this a lot, especially during the summer. Most of the tortoises are a bit dehydrated. The only way that you can really fix that, take them to a vet. They'll give you some fluids or tell you what to do there. But then we worry about the liver and kidney disease in these tortoises. So we do blood work often at the adoption program to make sure that the tortoise is still doing well before we send it out or adopt it out. So surrendering, a lot of our tortoises come from surrendering. We do not take anything out of the wild. A lot of people think that. They say, well, why are you out there taking them out of the wild if you have so many? We're not. The only ones that we take from the wild are ones that are severely injured or injured. We can fix it and put them right back out. Everything else is captive. All the other tortoises that we have are captive. I think I have 150 right now, and about 120 of them are about this size. So they're tiny. They're juveniles, and it's all from breeding. A lot of people don't know. They breed, they have little babies, they're small, say, oh, it's no big deal. But by the time it is a big deal and they're all about the size of a dinner plate, they have 40 or 50 of them. I think the most I've gotten from one home was 93. And a lot of them were small. So I have gotten quite a few from one home. It's usually a pretty high number. It's 50. We had 72 once. We had the 93. We get a lot in the 40s. So that's why we have so many. Plus, they get to be 80 years old. We can't, like with a dog or a cat, you got maybe 10 to 12 years. These guys, you got 80. So if you've got one and then they'll fight, if you get two, then you just kind of just have the one. We have a lot of people that moved from a home to an apartment. We accept surrenders pretty much all year, but I get most of them April to September because that's when they're more active. So things to consider before adopting. These guys are old. They live to be 80 plus. I found one, so way back, I can't remember when, but back then they used to drill a hole in the back of the shell, kind of the part that flares out, so that they can tie them to a stake in their yard. And when I get those, I know that tortoise is old. So I have seen those before. We've seen painted ones with like a year painted on them. So think about that. These guys live to be 80 something years old. Think about the other pets that you have. If you've got other tortoises and you don't really want to cordon them off into an area of the yard, then you probably don't want to do desert tortoise. They can carry salmonella, just like any other reptile. They can have salmonella. Just wash your hands. Just don't lick the tortoise. Wash your hands. Make sure that you keep their area clean. If you have anybody elderly that's living with you or very, very young children, just be sure that they wash their hands. I wouldn't recommend that they be out there cleaning the tortoise area. And then think about if you're going to be moving in the near future. If you're going to move in the next month or so, it's probably not a good idea to take one of these guys in. So that's it. We do also have the volunteer opportunities. It's on our website. You should be able to see it on there. You can also just Google it, Game and Fish volunteer opportunities. And we are constantly needing people to transport tortoises from Tucson or really Tucson, Kingman, and Yuma to Phoenix. A lot of the Tucson ones are usually injured. So we do need help with transport in that regard. Unfortunately, you would have to use your own vehicle and we can't reimburse for gas. So it would just be you doing a good deed. Unfortunately, that's not something I can change. But if that's something you're interested in, definitely go on our volunteer site and apply for that. I check that daily, so you should hear from me probably by email. It's usually the best way. And I will say, hey, I got your stuff. Are you still interested? And we just kind of go from there. So I think now we are good to do questions. Do we just want to do, people can just ask, or?
There are a few in the chat. Oh, if I
before-
was just going to say there are a few in the chat if you want me
Okay.
to read
Yeah.
you those.
Let's do those first and then go to oral questions.
Okay. If
So I see one from Sue.
Oh, you're going to read them? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My sister killed her old wild tortoise by spreading ant poison around when her children were bitten by ants in her backyard. Do you warn people about using those kinds of poisons?
Yeah, we do have it does say you cannot use, we don't recommend fertilizer, we don't recommend pesticides or herbicides. So we definitely don't recommend any of that. I get that question a lot with ants. So Amdro is great. And you just put it in a cinder blocks, this 2 cinder blocks, they have the 2 holes in the top. put it in there because the ants can get to it, but the tortoise can't. So if you need to do something about the ants, you can use Amdro. Just make sure it's somewhere that the tortoise can get to it. So we do have something that's in there that says no pesticides, no herbicides, or poisons used in the yard because they will find it.
Okay, the second question is also from Sue, and I think you've probably answered it already. Why is breeding not allowed?
Because we have so many
Yeah.
in captivity. We have a lot, and we get a lot from the breeding situations. So we made it illegal. I want to say in 2015, it became illegal to be breeding them because we were just getting overwhelmed with how many there were. And most of the time, they're not in good shape. Most of the time, they're sick. Most of the time, they have parasites. Most of the time, they're malnourished because it's hard to take care of that many tortoises. So we just made it illegal to do in captivity. Of course, they can breed in the wild, but if you have 2 in your yard, make sure they're the same gender.
Okay, and I think there's only one more written question, which is actually from me. If you're leaving the state, can you give a tortoise to a friend, or do you have to turn it into game and fish? If the latter, can the friend then adopt the tortoise? And I guess I would add is if you sell your house, can the tortoises stay where they are?
Yeah, they absolutely can. So you can gift a tortoise to somebody else. It's if you can let us know, that'd be awesome. That way we can update in the database. If your tortoise ever gets out, we know where it came from. But as long as there's no money exchanged, you can give it to a friend. We
Okay.
don't need to get it back. Yeah.
There
Or-
are some more questions, Carrie, further down.
Okay, yes, I see. Let's make sure I get all of them. Sandy's question regarding limiting fruit, does that include fruit from prickly pears as well, tunas?
Yeah, so they can have that a little more often. Like you can maybe do that twice a week instead of once a week, but it still does have a lot of sugar in it, so you don't want them to eat too much of it. Sometimes they get a little too spoiled, and that's all they'll eat. So if you just give them the prickly pear fruit, like one time, and then you give them like their normal food later, they're like, I don't want that. So I would limit that as well to maybe 2 times a week.
And would that also apply to saguaro and organ pipe fruit?
Yeah, any of the fruits.
Okay. Tim Flood would like to know if tortoises are active at night.
Not really. During the summer, they come out from like 4:30 in the morning to about 6:30 in the morning. They're very active. And then they might come out later in the day just before sunset, but I don't see them out at night very often.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. There are a number of people thanking you for your presentation, which I do as well. But if we have any off-the-cuff questions and you're willing to answer them, what I suggest people do is raise your hand, and we'll sort of have the honor system here. We'll go with the person who raised their hand first, speaks first, and then we'll go through the list of people. They should pop up to the top of the pictures, just like Anna did. And when you're done, don't forget to lower your hand, and you can raise your hand by going to the bottom of the screen where it says reactions with a smiley face, and click on that. And then there's a place where you can click on raise hand. And if you have trouble with that, just frantically wave your hand, and when somebody notices you, we'll put you in the queue. So with that said, Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, just more curiosity, because you mentioned that because the summer is longer, that's going to affect how long they're going to be in their burrow. So does that affect the tortoise's health in any way if they're down longer or shorter?
It doesn't, but vets always do recommend that they do brumate. So we do have vets that'll say they should brumate. You shouldn't keep them awake. So there are people that'll bring them inside during the winter and not brumate them, which vets do say that does affect them. I don't know the science behind that. I wish I did. I just assume it's something that's internal with them. So the natural brumation, as long as they do it, I don't think it matters for them when, as far as health.
Okay, do we have any other
Okay.
questions? We can have a tortoise free for all now where you just start talking. Oh, I have a question. What do you do if a tortoise refuses to go into its burrow?
Oh, we get that a lot. So the first thing I'll ask is, can you send me pictures of it? I'll check it out. A lot of the times it's just too big. They do like a very snug area. So you
Oh.
can shove a bunch of Timothy or Bermuda hay in there, and typically that fixes it. Or you can add more insulation to it. So maybe it's not comfortable in there. Make sure there's no rocks in there. Sometimes they don't like visitors. I mean, they get, they live with rattlesnakes and Gila monsters and go for snakes all the time, but some of them are a little picky and they don't like that. So just make sure there's no other creatures living in there too.
And how much handling can they tolerate?
These guys, so we always say do not pick up a wild tortoise because it will void. Basically, it'll urinate, and it will lose all of its water stores and it will not get it back. So if you pick up a tortoise in the wild, it urinates, you put it down, it's probably not going to make it. But the captive tortoise, since they do have access to water, we know twice a week, if they do void, just soak them. Some of them are a little more shy than others, so it kind of depends on the tortoise how much you can handle them. Some of them love to be scratched on the head, under the chin, will come right up to you. Some of them prefer to be on their own in their burrow and will just ignore you. We have a lot of people that'll say that they go and sit on their porch and have morning coffee with their tortoise. So they can be social or they can be shy. They're just kind of like people.
They're great, relatively low maintenance pets.
Yeah. People will ask me all the time, can we go out of town and just let our tortoise just be in the yard? And that's fine. Like during the winter, it's probably better. But during the summer, I would recommend having maybe like a neighbor look over your fence, make sure he's not flipped over or stuck somewhere in the heat. Other than that, yeah, they're pretty. You don't even, if you have grass, you don't even need to feed them.
Okay, do we have any other questions before we end the presentation? I think was Rebecca who gave us a link in the chat to where you can find the information on tortoises at Game and Fish's website. Because one person said they had a problem with the bit.ly address, that it didn't take them there. So you might try that alternative.
Yeah, at worst, you can definitely just Google Arizona Game and Fish, Desert Tortoise Adoption. It's usually the first thing that pops up.
Right. Is there anything else that you would like to say to us, Tegan?
No, thank you for letting me present and taking up most of your meeting time. It's a lot to talk about and I love talking about them. So I really appreciate you guys inviting me.
Well, and you're very knowledgeable about tortoises. I don't know if that was what you studied, but you've certainly gotten up to speed on it. And we're glad to have someone like you in charge of the tortoises.
Thank you. Yeah, 10 years in the works. So I hope I know what I'm talking about.
Great. Tegan, you're welcome to stay on the meeting if you want. We'll just do a little bit of our usual monthly business and we'll try to wrap this up by 7 tonight.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I'm going to head out. Let me know if you guys